It all begins with Superman lying on the frozen ground of Antarctica, literally dying. Blood is pouring profusely from his nose, and he's barely able to breathe after a great struggle. At that moment, a blizzard is rapidly approaching him. It turns out to be Krypto, his beautiful and loyal dog, who has come to find him. Krypto joyfully jumps on him, although Superman is no longer able to move and, with barely any strength, begs his faithful companion to take him back home. It's then that we see that Superman's suit once again sports the classic red underwear integrated into its design. Just as Superman requested, Krypto guides him back home. Thus, the icy surface cracks, and the Fortress of Solitude emerges imposingly, with its characteristic ice castle and the iconic letter S on the door. Immediately, Superman's robots come to his aid. Although Superman thanks them, the robots respond that they are completely devoid of consciousness and were designed only to serve, so his thanks are meaningless to them. To reassure him while he recovers, the robots project a message from his biological parents. In the recording, they explain that they sent him from Krypton to Earth to save him and express that they love him more than heaven and earth combined, placing all their hope in him. However, the transmission is abruptly interrupted, as only half of the message remains intact. The other half was lost or damaged during the journey to Earth. The robots report that Superman has 14 broken bones, as well as damage to his kidney, liver, and bladder. They consider it essential to expose him to an intense dose of solar radiation to fully restore him. Therefore, they bring him directly into sunlight to speed his recovery. At the same time, we meet Angela Espica, a human meta tracking Superman in Antarctic, although she informs her team that she has been unable to locate him so far. Meanwhile, in the Fortress of Solitude, Superman tells his robots that he wants to return to combat. However, the robots warn him that he has barely reached 85% recovery. Despite this, Superman ignores the warnings and prepares to resume the fight. In parallel, we see Luthor, who is also Angela's boss, directing his team with the goal of defeating Superman using every resource at his disposal. It is then that Baravia's hammer appears, delivering a violent blow to Superman, leaving him defenseless on the ground. It seems as if he knows Superman's every maneuver in advance. At that critical moment, a civilian named Malik Ali, who had once offered Superman food, approaches and helps him up. However, Lex Luthor quickly identifies the civilian. For her part, Angela follows Superman's tracks to the Fortress of Solitude and manages to spot him, although she barely catches a glimpse of him before he disappears. Luthor, in turn, manages to observe him from his office thanks to the installed cameras. Baravia's hammer sentences Superman, proclaiming that this will be his last battle. Seeing Superman lying on the ground, the crowd begins to mock him. Meanwhile, we discover that Baravia's hammer arrives at the Luthor Corporation facilities, revealing itself to be a powerful robot known as Ultraman, who had only been posing as Baravia's hammer to deceive the public. Finally, Luthor explains that Ultraman has spent decades meticulously studying Superman's every move, giving him a definitive advantage to attack him relentlessly. Later, we see Clark Kent arriving at his job as a journalist. He receives a call from his parents, who greet him warmly and tell him they just wanted to congratulate him and remind him that they think about him a lot, asking him not to forget them. However, Clark briefly says goodbye and continues with his day. At that moment, Lois Lane appears, mocking Clark a bit with his usual mischievousness. Meanwhile, the news reports that the president of Boravia, Basil, has publicly declared that there are no ties between his country and the individual known as the Hammer of Boravia. For his part, Clark comments that he has had the opportunity to interview Superman on multiple occasions. At the same time, the news shows how public opinion towards Superman has turned negative since his appearance. At the Luthor Corp facilities, Lex Luthor gathers several representatives of the elite to present what he describes as the most powerful force on the planet. Ultraman, as well as a group of raptors, powerful beings designed to neutralize any extraterrestrial threat. Luthor attempts to persuade businessmen and influential figures to invest in his metahumans, arguing that Superman represents a potential threat. However, the representatives point out that Superman has prevented a war and is also popular among the population. Despite this, Luthor insists that Superman is dangerous and must be stopped, though he admits he lacks conclusive evidence to prove he poses a real danger. For this reason, the representatives refuse to take drastic measures. Meanwhile, Lois and Clark decide to go on a date, as they haven't had one in the past 3 months. During their meeting, they discuss recent events related to the Boravian hammer. Superman expresses his desire for Lois to interview him, to which she agrees. "Are you serious?" "Yes. Will you let me interview you as Superman?" "Of course." The recording begins, and Lois asks him about the criticism he's received lately, noting that even the Secretary of Defense has announced he will investigate him for his actions on Boravia. Superman explains that he intervened in Jarjampur and had a conversation with the president of Boravia, although he cannot reveal details because it is private information. This angers Lois, who reproaches him for not simply declaring in an interview that there are things he can't share, as that leaves a bad impression on the public. Clark replies to Lois that he acted the way he did because he's convinced the Boravian government has ignoble intentions. Roy asks if he at least requested permission to enter Boravian airspace, but Superman admits he didn't, arguing that he acted solely as his own representative and in accordance with what he believes is right. He adds that he made that decision because many lives were at risk, and he firmly believed he had to intervene. Lois comments that she has received countless criticisms on social media as a result of the situation. However, Superman clarifies that he doesn't have time to pay attention to social media. He then opens up emotionally and tells Lois about his biological parents. He explains that he comes from Krypton, a planet that no longer exists, destroyed along with all its history, culture, and loved ones. He tells her that his parents sent him to Earth when he was just a child, with the purpose of saving him and allowing him to serve humanity. Lois then confesses that much of the population suspects he's on Earth for disturbing or secret purposes, which deeply irritates Clark. Lois, visibly frustrated, admits that she sensed the conversation wouldn't go well and acknowledges that romantic relationships aren't exactly his strong suit. At this, Clark decides to leave quietly, leaving Lois alone and thoughtful. Meanwhile, Luthor and his team have arrived in Antarctic, where they discover Superman's ice castle. Upon arrival, Luthor manages to activate it and completely invade the facility, although Angela doesn't know how he managed to do so, as the castle should only be opened with Superman's DNA. Luthor, accompanied by his superhumans, destroys all the robots that stand in his way. Angela contributes significantly, and just as they have eliminated all their adversaries, Krypto appears. However, they only cover his face and dismiss him without further involvement. In reality, Luthor has traveled there with a single purpose: to find evidence that could incriminate Superman. Meanwhile, Otis, a member of Luthor Corporation, has arrived in Metropolis carrying a box containing something intended to release something dangerous. He aims to distract Superman while they extract crucial information from his castle. For her part, Angela dedicates herself to recovering the rest of the damaged message from Superman's parents and, after arduous efforts, manages to fully restore it. Back in Metropolis, Otis frees the little monster, and Superman immediately arrives to help rescue a puppy who is about to be crushed by the creature, which grows enormously. While this is happening, Lois watches the events through the news. That's when the Justice Gang, consisting of Hawkgirl, Green Lantern, and Mr. Terrific, bursts in. Together they manage to defeat the monster, and just as the enormous creature is about to collapse and crush the crowd, Superman intervenes to ensure everyone can escape unharmed. Finally, the news reports that fortunately there were no casualties. However, after this heroic act, no one applauds. The news has spread that Superman is actually a threat. According to reports, the message sent by his parents was analyzed by 28 of the world's most prestigious linguists, who confirmed its translation. In it, his parents express that they love him more than heaven and earth and reveal that his beloved home will cease to exist forever. However, they assure him that hope lies in Superman, as after traveling the universe, they concluded that Earth is the best place for him. Its inhabitants, however, are simple, confused, and possess weak minds. Therefore, as the last son of Krypton, he must eliminate all those unable to serve him. Furthermore, their genes and legacy are in his hands, and he must honor them by ruling without mercy. Faced with this revelation, Luthor appears before the public and proclaims that Superman is subjugating humanity, paving the way for his descendants to conquer Earth, something he will never allow. Consequently, Superman wanders the streets, deeply saddened, while being subjected to insults and recriminations from the people. Finally, Superman takes refuge in a room. There, Green Lantern comes to confront him, convinced after hearing his parent message that Superman is a threat. However, Superman assures him that he never heard the entire message, as the second half was damaged during transit. At that moment, Mr. Terrific intervenes and clarifies that the forensic department wouldn't have certified the message's authenticity if there was any doubt, so the content couldn't be fake. At this point, Superman decides to return immediately to the ice castle, convinced that this is the only place they could have obtained the original recording. Meanwhile, representatives from various nations meet for an urgent summit to discuss whether Superman really poses a danger to the planet. On the news, the president of Borovia appears, declaring that Superman only intervened in his invasion of Jarjumper with the purpose of subjugating his people and keeping him as slaves. He further states that Boravian women are more attractive, and that for this reason, Superman wants to integrate them into his personal harem. After concluding his interview, the president retires to his office and passes through a secret portal that leads him to Luthor. Upon meeting, the president is exultant, convinced that they have managed to take Superman out of the game thanks to the supposedly fake message Luthor fabricated. However, Luthor clarifies that the message is authentic and explains that destroying Superman was extremely easy, partly due to his own parents. When Superman arrives at his castle and finds it completely devastated, he encounters one of his robots named For, who confesses that he did everything in his power to protect him, but failed to fulfill his mission. He then logs off in Superman's arms, leaving him visibly shaken. Shortly after, Superman realizes that Krypto has disappeared. Determined, he heads to Luthor Corp to demand that Luthor reveal the whereabouts of Krypto. However, Luthor claims to have no idea what he is talking about. While the two argue, Luthor partner, Eve, is secretly recording them and broadcasting the conversation live. During the broadcast, an agitated Superman is seen yelling at Luthor, which creates a media scandal. Simultaneously, the news broadcasts images of Peacemaker, who takes advantage of the situation to speak in derogatory terms about Superman. After this episode, Superman, deeply dejected, arrives at Lois' apartment. She, surprised, tells him that she just found out he has a dog and tenderly offers him a cup of hot chocolate. Superman then reveals that the ship he was sent on was damaged during the journey, and that he had only managed to listen to the first half of his parents' recording. Lois, understanding, tells him that she believes in him, although she points out that one of his greatest flaws is blindly trusting everyone and assuming that all human beings are kind, which is far from the truth. Clark, somewhat confused, asks what he means by he realizes their relationship wasn't working out and confesses that he's considering turning himself in, as perhaps that way they'll lead him to his beloved Krypto. A bewildered Lois asks him why he's so interested in a mere dog, to which Superman replies that he was entrusted with its care and is determined to fulfill his responsibility. Lois, unable to help herself, hugs him. Superman whispers that he loves her, and they say goodbye. The next day, Superman voluntarily surrenders to Luthor's soldiers, who brutally subdue him and force him to the ground without mercy. Stunned, Superman is captured and, with a hint of irony, mentions that no one has read him his rights. However, Colonel Flagg coldly explains that the court has ruled that, as an alien, Superman has no rights under human law. He is then put on a ship and taken to a secret Luthor base located in the middle of the desert. Once there, a squad of raptors escorts him to a dimensional portal that leads to a pocket universe created by Luthor through a small rift between the two worlds. Luthor accesses this universe through multiple portals scattered across the planet. They eventually arrive at a hidden prison where Luthor holds various individuals whom Borovia has ordered imprisoned. Among the prisoners are troublemakers, and even Luthor's former lovers. He has even imprisoned a woman whose only crime was writing a spiteful blog after her breakup with him. Superman is then confined in a cell alongside Rex, a shapeshifter capable of altering his body's makeup at will. Luthor orders Rex to transform one of his hands into kryptonite, the only substance capable of weakening Superman. Rex, with no alternative, complies with the order, as Luthor holds his son captive in a cell within the same prison. Meanwhile, Lois is at the newspaper office investigating the reasons why Luthor Corp is interfering in Boravia's affairs. During his search, he uncovers alarming information. Luthor Corp had sold weapons to Borovia at ridiculously low prices. At that moment, his partner, Jimmy, appears and reveals that thanks to a contact, he has learned that Superman is trapped in a pocket universe. Inside that pocket universe, Luthor appears before Superman and reveals that they have Krypto in their possession. He assures him that the dog will remain locked up, will be exhaustively studied, and will eventually be permanently put to sleep, but not before undergoing a painful process. Furthermore, Luthor informs Superman that he will never leave that place either, as it is his private correctional facility. Luthor also confesses that if it were up to him, he would have already ended his life, but the governments insist on interrogating him before making any decisions. Meanwhile, Jimmy meets with Eve, Luthor's partner and secretly Jimmy's informant. He questions her about Luthor's true plans, but Eve claims not to know for sure. However, she promises to find out more details if Jimmy agrees to go on a date with her. Before leaving, Eve distraughtly confesses that Luthor tortured a dog the day before, and that she's not finished with him because he boasts about having all his exes locked up in his private correctional facility. Meanwhile, a weakened Superman proposes to Rex that removing the kryptonite could help him rescue his son, the little shapeshifter. However, Rex reacts furiously and, instead of helping him, brings the kryptonite even closer to Superman, causing him unbearable pain. At the same time, Lois rejoins the Justice Gang, determined to find and rescue Superman. Mr. Terrific manages to track Superman's location, having previously planted nanotrackers in his blood. He explains to the team that Superman is at a deactivated military base, and although the signal is lost at that point, it confirms that he is in a pocket universe. However, Green Lantern and Hawkgirl are reluctant to participate in the rescue, stating that they do not wish to fight to save Superman. Lois, visibly upset, bids them farewell sarcastically, telling Green Lantern that his haircut does not suit him. As she prepares to leave, Mr. Terrific follows her and assures her that he will accompany her on her mission. Meanwhile, Basil and Luthor take Malik Ali, a civilian who had previously helped Superman by feeding him and helping him get up when he was injured, to the prison. Luthor plans to use him to blackmail Superman and force him to answer all the questions they intend to ask him. In his agony, Superman begs Luthor not to hurt Malik. However, when they begin to question him about possible accomplices, Superman insists that he does not work with no one else. The captors don't believe him and without hesitation, they shoot Malik in the head. Meanwhile, Mr. Terrific and Lois finally arrive at the secret base where Superman is being held prisoner, determined to rescue him. Mr. Terrific senses signs of Superman's presence and without hesitation begins to confront all who stand in his way, protecting Lois with an energy field. Once he has defeated his opponents, the two continue their journey and reach a tent that houses access to a pocket universe. There, Mr. Terrific explains to Lois how dangerous it is to create a pocket universe, as it could trigger the formation of a black hole and fracture space every time someone enters or leaves it. Mr. Terrific then confesses that he is only helping her because it will upset Green Lantern. Wasting no time, he begins to decipher the code needed to open the portal to that universe. For his part, Rex is deeply dejected for not having managed to save the civilian who died before his very eyes. Steeling himself, he asks Superman if he's capable of reaching his son and rescuing him. Superman nods determinedly, and then Rex decides to disintegrate the kryptonite he was holding in his hand to stop injuring and weakening him. When Superman manages to partially recover, Rex questions him about why he continues to look so weakened. Then, when Superman explains that his poor condition is due to the lack of sunlight, he needs to absorb the radiation of the yellow sun to regenerate his strength, since that's where his powers come from. Meanwhile, Mr. Terrific and Lois finally manage to decipher the code that allows them to enter the pocket universe and cross the portal. Once inside, they encounter a river of antiprotons that prevents them from continuing. If they ventured to cross it, they would be vaporized in a matter of seconds and would never make it back to Superman alive. Meanwhile, in the cell where Superman is being held captive, Rex explains that although he cannot create a true sun, he is capable of generating something similar by combining various substances produced by his own body. Once the mixture is complete, it produces a flash so intense that it allows Superman to gradually regain his strength. When Superman is fully recovered, he immediately flies to the cell where Rex's son is being held and frees him, reuniting the baby with his father. However, Rex asks Superman to take his son with him, as he cannot carry him when he shapeshifts. Together, they then set out to find Krypto, but just as they are about to escape, they are surprised and pulled into the river of antiprotons. Krypto bravely intervenes to help. At the most critical moment, Superman is about to be sucked into a black hole and desperately calls out to Krypto. Rex also rushes to their aid, and thanks to his help and Superman's tip-off, they manage to get to safety. Mr. Terrific manages to find them and helps them escape, managing to escape just before the portal closes permanently. After their escape, Superman and Lois reunite. Superman, although weak, tells Lois that there are still more people who need to be rescued. Mr. Terrific offers her his ship so she can travel safely. Meanwhile, Eve contacts Jimmy and reveals that he has all the information needed to destroy Luther. However, before proceeding, he demands that Jimmy promise that they will go out together on Saturday, just the two of them. However, Luther suddenly appears, takes Eve away, and although she manages to send the information, it turns out that what was transmitted were only provocative photographs of herself. Meanwhile, Lois accompanies Superman to visit Clark's parents. Later, Jimmy contacts Lois to inform her about the situation and sends her the photos. To everyone's surprise, at the bottom of those selfies lies crucial data belonging to Luther, which turns out to be of great relevance. Meanwhile, Luther prepares to reopen the portal to the Pocket Universe, despite the fact that doing so could cause a three-dimensional rift. However, the possibility of such a catastrophe doesn't concern him, and he actually causes the rift to form, demonstrating why a pocket universe should never be created. The next day, Superman's father tells him that Lois is a good girl and that he's also noticed that he's different. Superman feels bad because his parents sent him to kill, but Jonathan Kent tells him that parents don't decide what their children want to do. It's their decisions and actions that make them the man they are, and that he couldn't be more proud of him today. They hug each other. On the other hand, Green Lantern watches the news about the war in Borovia. Superman also sees this and learns that the children of Borovia are asking for his help, so he plans to go there. But Terrific informs Superman about the rift, so he must go, as it could destroy the entire Earth. Later, Jimmy and Lois tell Perry, the head of the news communications department, that Luther is doing all this to get half of Jarhamper ceded to him, since Luther wants to make himself king. He's even colluding with the president of Borovia, Basil, who created the rift to distract Superman and prevent him from intervening in the war. Mr. Terrific is unable to stop the rift, and neither is the Luther Corp team because Luther refuses to do so, so they take the ship out of their building. Mr. Terrific claims there's a code to close the rift, which is located at Luther Corporation. But Superman must first find Krypto, whom he had taken for a walk so he wouldn't kill his parents' cows. Ultraman then arrives and takes Superman to a football stadium where they also fight with the meta-human Angela. Luther asks Angela to fill Superman's lungs with air, and she does so before Luther watches. When Superman is literally on the verge of death, Basil is sent to start the war. Superman is infested with nanites, and Luther orders Angela to finish inserting them completely. Superman flies to the highest point, even leaving the planet, and when he can no longer go any further, they fall at maximum speed, something Angela may not survive due to the force of the impact. However, when they land, Superman is still alive and manages to expel the nanites. Luther sends the Raptors, as they discover that Angela is still alive, although she is about to die, and that Ultraman has also survived. It is then that Ultraman's mask falls off, and Superman learns that he was cloned. Luther searched the rubble of his battles and found a hair to clone, allowing him to open his ice castle because it possesses his DNA. However, the clone proved imperfect, as it is clumsier than him, easier to control, although stronger. Thus, Luther orders Ultraman to hit him with all his might. Elsewhere, we see a child praying for Superman to arrive and free them from the war. Superman assures Luther that no matter what he does, he will not win and that his plans in Borovia will fail, as he has called some friends. It turns out that he sent Justice Gone, who is helping to stop the war, also with the support of Rex and his baby. Meanwhile, Perry says they can publish the whole truth, since Jimmy and Lois already know everything Luther has done. Luther started the war solely to have an excuse to kill Superman. Luther wants to kill him because, according to him, Superman is destroying them all, and he's also jealous, something he even admits. Superman smiles as he's being defeated, stating that mind overcomes strength and calls Krypto. When he's freed from his clone, he sends Krypto to collect the spheres, which were actually the surveillance cameras Luther had installed. Just then, the Raptors arrive, and Superman prepares to fight them. After defeating them, the clone reappears to continue beating him. However, Superman attacks him with greater force and sends him into a black hole. He then heads off with Mr. Terrific to close the rift, and they arrive at Luther Corp. Superman declares that he is as human as anyone, that he knows how to love and also feels fear, that every day when he wakes up, he puts one foot in front of the other and moves on, and that he makes mistakes many times because that's what being human is all about. He expresses his hope that Luther will one day come to understand him. Luther, however, replies that he doesn't care because the governments have given him permission to kill him. But Krypto intervenes and begins to brutally beat Luther. He and the other co-workers were watching and see how the rift is closed thanks to Mr. Terrific, who obtained the code. On the news, everything is revealed about Luther, his secret collaboration with Basil and the Boravian government. Now everyone knows that Luther is a traitor. It is revealed that the entire world had turned against Superman, but now everyone recognizes that they owe him an apology, because Superman is and always will be the hero they always believed in. Luther has fallen, the war has been averted, and the people are happy. Rex joins the Justice Gang after helping to save the war. Luther is arrested, and everyone he had held prisoner, including his former partners, is released. Eve meets with Jimmy, and then Lois meets with Superman. She goes to interview him in a secluded location, although she really only does so to kiss him. And finally, Lois tells him that she loves him too. Afterwards, Superman returns to his ice castle, where his robots have repaired everything and are self-repairing. He names his fourth robot, who will now be called Gary. Later, his cousin Supergirl arrives, who is actually the owner of Krypto and enjoys partying on other planets, since their metabolism prevents them from getting drunk on planets with yellow suns. Therefore, his cousin prefers to travel to worlds with red suns. Now Superman is getting ready to rest while he watches a message from his human parents reviewing all their memories, and he feels happy. Thus concludes this story. But there are two post-credit scenes. In the first, we see Superman contemplating Earth with Krypto. In the second, we see Superman talking with Mr. Terrific about the state of Metropolis after the great threat that almost destroyed everything. And now, this story ends. Until next time.